I'm just diving in with this stuff now because I can't think of any other better way or a better way of putting it out there. So there's a fantastic AI thinker called Peter J. Scott, and he's been working on and around AI, and he's a fantastic communicator for how AI works for decades and decades now. And he uses his metaphor where he says, can you imagine if an alien species had sent contact to Earth and said, we're going to be arriving sometime in the next 10 years, how humanity would have reacted to that? Chances are, chances are it would have changed an awful lot, including the preparations for their arrival, how we were going to treat them, etc., etc. And yet, in very, very similar ways, that's exactly what's happening with AI. There is this new intelligence, in whatever way you choose to put it, that is about to, if not having made itself known, is going to make itself known. And yet we seem to have done very little preparation. There certainly doesn't seem to be any kind of landing stage or who's going to walk forward with medals and greeting or what our first words are going to be. We just seem to have approached it with that very human let's model through. And so I've seen an awful lot of glossy AI vids, etc. But I wanted to do my own approach to it. And my own approach is to whenever I take a subject, be it Joyce or Shakespeare or Orson Welles or what have you, I don't know, there's something compulsive in me that just hammers the absolute hell out of it, and to try and get into it as much as possible. I've recently been talking about the word understand. What do we mean by when we say understand? And the word comes from Low German originally. I believe it might have been pronounced something like understudden. Sounds suitably Germanic, but understudden meant to be amongst a thing. And so it was originally used for when you were in amongst the group of the tribe making a decision, or a group of people who got together and you were in amongst, so you got to understand what they were saying. The understood, you were there in amongst. And one of the biggest catch points at the moment around AI is, does it understand what it's doing? Then forget the consciousness. There's as many definitions of consciousness as there are human beings, and for somebody who's spent at least a decade and a half in profoundly deep Buddhist philosophy, you understand that the word nebulous doesn't even begin to describe what we mean by consciousness and what it means to be me, to experience reality as us. But understand is something different, or understand is something we can get ahead of. Does something understand? Does it get in amongst? Does it understand the getting in amongst something? And that's a real pain point, I believe, is a modern term for what we are talking about when we talk about AI. So does AI understand what it's doing? And for this, we probably, to explain it, not in a... Do you know what? I'm going to be bloke down the pub, because that's the happiest place I can be. The bloke down the pub, trying to explain to somebody what it is. Okay, so these large learning machines, these work on these huge, the embodiment of AI, the ChatGPT, etc., work on a concept of huge amounts of data, which is then fed into a neural network. So it emulates how a brain works, okay, with your neurons firing. So all computation, up until recently, has been based on that binary system of yes, no. So it answers questions. Is it a yes? It's a coin toss. Is it a yes? Is it no? Is it heads or tails? Is it right or wrong? And then it can figure out the least amount of questions it has to ask, whether something is right or wrong, to come up with the answer, which it then disgorges onto your screen. And up until very recently, that's exactly how LLMs were doing these large language models. They were doing it, but just doing it unbelievably faster at answering questions. They were computationally far more powerful than anything we are able or capable to do. Just like using a calculator or a scientific calculator's ability to come up with answers far quicker. So its capacity to computate was great, but it was still doing it in this binary, essentially, this answering a series of yes, no, and then moving on to the next. Well, okay, if no, then move on to the next, and then yes, no, all the way down. But the big difference now is that in amongst those neural computations, in amongst the weeds of what they call the black boxes, they introduced a system or a way that the computation is able to refer back to itself. And that makes a huge difference. That is an absolute key point, because that's what we do. So Buckminster Fuller, the great visionary, futurologist, engineer, and incredibly verbose individual, but he used to point out that when you walk along the street, when you literally commit the act of walking, you are committing an act of error correction. So every time you put your foot forward, left or right, you're tipping forward. And the only thing that stops you falling over is that your other foot comes in and compensates for that. And you do that with every step. And you do it unconsciously. None of us think about it. But every step we're falling forward, the other step stabilises, pushes us forward, the other step comes and stabilises. And this is an incredible feat of engineering, and this is just, mind-blowing. But it also is a reflection on how we think. That's exactly what we do. We make a decision, we error correct, we make another decision, we make constant decisions. This idea that we have that this, as Sam Harris and other neurological sort of purveyors of thought will talk about, we have this kind of vague idea that there's a sort of homunculus occupying this area here, in charge of the levers, who is in some strange way coordinating things. And it isn't like that. There isn't an individuated self. There isn't a little person sitting in a comfy, easy chair pushing levers. I think I might have just taken that from the films Men in Black. But so that idea that there's a centralised locus, there isn't. It's a series of coordinated, huge. It's a gaggle at best, and fighting for dominance as to who should come up with the best idea and the one to go forward. But it can essentially boil down to the same idea of walking along the street, where you have constant error correction. So you pitch forward, stabilise, pitch forward, stabilise. You come up with a decision, you countermand yourself, and then you eventually come up with an idea, and that's the thing that moves you forward. And that was very different than the computational thought process, or the how computers worked, because they didn't have that idea of compensation, that idea of a referring back to the hang on a minute, previous experience. And basically what they didn't have was imagination. Because imagination, that is the tool of us being able to theoretically pitch ourselves forward into the future. We can imagine what something may happen if we were to do. If we were to pursue this course, this is what could happen. And contrary to a lot of Darwinian survival experts, etc., would say, that imagination is an incredibly, in fact, probably one of the key survival tools that humanity has ever devised. Our ability to project a hypothetical scenario into the future. And we do that by referring back to things that have happened in the past. So we can reach backwards into our experiences and we can extrapolate and throw them forward. It's a bit abstract, and maybe in a pub you'd be going, I'll get another round in. So bear with me. So your imagination is you throwing forward things that have happened in the past and just seeing what happens and thinking, well, okay, all this happened, I learnt about this, I read this book, I've seen this film, I know this, put it all together and I'll throw it into the future and have a look and see what that looks like. Oh, okay, that looks like something I can pursue. Nope, don't want to do that because that might happen, etc. So that imagination has been a core point. Now, anybody who knows me, I love my dogs. Great, doesn't have a huge amount of imagination, doesn't seem to suffer from not having an amount of imagination, can work out some puzzles and stuff, but is not both cursed or possessed with the idea of imagination, because for all its good stuff, it can also imagine a whole host of horrors, all of our anxieties, all of our worries, all of our thinking of what might happen. That is all subject to our imagination as well. And as we know, a long time ago, evolution gave us a choice, and evolution turned around and said, okay, so you can either not worry about the future, not have imagination, you're probably going to end up as lunch fairly quickly, or you can live with the anxieties, the worries, the fears, but it's going to keep you alive. So you've got survival and anxiety, no anxiety, and a short lifespan. And evolution made a call. It realised and said, you know what? I'd rather be anxious and alive than I would be happy and very quickly dead. So that's the thing, or one of the great things that makes us humans, or makes the human consciousness different to the animal side. So what you have here now is that because of the deep learning, the amount of information that we have put into the LLMs, into artificial intelligence, it is on the cusp, and this is the key point, if you want, where AI is disputing amongst itself, the industry and the people involved, is that the advanced LLMs are showing signs of being able to refer back. And this has been proven by their output and their answers. They are beginning to show imagination. They are beginning to extrapolate from the data they've had before what could be a potential scenario in the future. Not just predicting on the basis of what is the most likely, it's using the imaginative concept of what could come. So we'll have to start reading or a little bit in here, because I've watched, even in my local area, one of my local professors gave a talk on AI, and she was incredibly adamant. It's just a predictive text. That's all it can do. Just very well and do it brilliantly, but it is just predicting the next word. And the other, or the sort of the sources to which I tend to have a more investment in, would refute that and say it's not predicting in the statistical sense. That idea of, I can figure out who's going to come first, I can take all the data, etc. It's not statistics extraction. It's figuring out the meaning of the sentence as what it's doing, and the meaning of its sentence is then allowing it to predict. So it's starting to understand the language that it conveys. And that's difficult to that it's starting to have self-attention. And so for that to sort of really hit home, you have to, again, by information theory, but the understanding of what language means, that every word is a fossilized poem, and it was language that separated us completely, made the great chasm and divide, our ability to express ideas and notions and thoughts, etc. And so if now AI is not just predicting language, but is starting to go back to what I said earlier on about understand, to get amongst the language itself. This is the key point. If it's doing this, this arises, or this throws up the idea that what we might be looking at, or what we could be saying, is it has imagination. And if it has imagination, it's starting to think in the same processes, the same ideas of referring back to its previous ideas that we are doing, that we do. And that's profound. That's where the idea of it's not just a calculating machine or a predictive machine anymore. It's starting to look back on itself. I have my own ideas about this. Trust me, if we were in a pub, it'd be way past closing time by the time I finished. I'd be sort of insisting on a lock-in. That I think maybe it might be that a complexity, once it reaches a certain scale, kind of looks to hiring or employing some kind of supervisor. When things get so big, it's like, oh God, I need a personal assistant, or I need somebody to coordinate that. Hence, that's where the idea of the concept of a self individuator come, and that's what happened in our own brains. Then, when we were at lower levels of complexity, there was no need to have a consciousness. There was no need to have a sense of I, a sense of myself in charge of this organisation, this neural network, this thing. It was quite happy buzzing along on its own, but it reached a stage where it was like, yeah, we're going to have to kind of employ something to come along, and hence that's where we came from. And it might be that on the same sense of complexities, that LLMs and AIs has now reached a degree of complexity where it's hiring, it's bringing forth a coordinator, and that's just a complete and absolute a moonshot, an idea I have. It makes sense to me. But yeah, so that's one of the core. That's what's the real wrestle that's going on, because you can imagine the profound implications of what this means. That if it's thinking for itself, then the justification of, well, then this is a new species, just as an alien species. This, if it thinks for itself, if it has sentience, another word with 1,000 interpretations, but if it has that, then that changes everything. I don't even have to begin to know what that mean, that we are suddenly sharing the planet with something else that thinks. But there you go. These are noodle thoughts. I'm going to call this the Noodle series. I have no idea if you're interested or not. Just what I have to say. And but again, it's going to be incredibly interesting as things move forward. I still like your brain. I mean, I kind of like the unjudgmental side of their brain, but you know, if we were in a pub, I'd rather review you than with an AI at the moment. See ya.